Welcome to Why the Long Face? Two old friends lifting the lid on mental health over a beer with author and psychiatrist Paul Keedwell and business consultant and so-called comedian Ollie Turnbull.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of our new season 3 of Why the Long Face, the special guest season. And we do have a special guest who Dr. Paul is going to announce in a very short while. But until he does that, Dr. Paul.
Yeah, man.
Hello, sir.
How you doing?
How you doing?
Are you well?
I've had a great weekend. Yeah, I fixed a fountain in the garden. Can you believe that I would do something so almost
as
manly?
useful and practical as that? No, I can't.
No, and it works. It's absolutely
for
incredible. And also, for now. And also, it's incredibly difficult to do. There's all sorts of moving parts in terms of getting the motor in the right place.
Well, that's great, man. I'm
really
glad.
easy.
I'm happy for you. I went for a cycle ride along the Thames today.
Were you social distancing?
I was social distancing, although the path does get a bit narrow at times, I must admit.
Well, that doesn't matter as long as you're not riding two abreast.
But then the new guidance is try to keep 2 meters distance where possible. So I just stayed alert, which is the new advice that no one understands.
But how can they? It's subjective.
So that's where we are at the moment. We have to all stay alert.
Yeah, just going into week 9 now, aren't we?
And I'm glad to say that we are seeing a clear downward trend now in the 7-day averages for deaths. We did see that uptick that we mentioned last time with our residential care deaths, which was inevitable, unfortunately.
Yeah, they've actually been backdated as well. So I keep the stats because I love my data, as do you.
Yeah.
It's all been backdated. So the curve is smooth. So it now goes back to as if we always counted the those deaths out of hospital as well. We were in a worse position than Spain and Italy and France, in fact.
Not per capita, I think.
Not per capita, absolutely. Yeah.
But we're more or less the same curve, I'd say. I mean, there's no point in saying, oh, we're doing better. As you said, we're not coming down from the peak as rapidly, perhaps, as Spain and Italy.
No, we're definitely not. Although we've had a good week, and
we've had a
very
week.
Relative term.
We've had a relatively good week, and it seems that now the mood of the nation, I may be speaking a little bit out of turn here, is moving more from panic to frustration and boredom.
Well, you predicted this, and I think you might well be right because it's easier to lock down than it is to reverse it because it's a binary thing to begin with, and now it's like arguing over the schools, arguing whether London should lock down,
should unlock first. Should
all 4 countries in the United Kingdom have the same policy? What is social distances? Why can you only see one person?
Well, because the R number is probably lowest in London, or it is lowest in London at the moment.
Yeah. And yet, of course, London still has the same risks as it always did of loads of people commuting and sneezing on each other. So it's a multi-factor equation that no one really knows the answer to. And anyone who says they do is a maniac.
And no one knows the answer, again, as a symptom, I guess, of us being 47th in the world or something in terms of the amount of tests we've done per capita. As that ramps up.
Terrible stat.
Yeah, as that ramps up, we'll be able to have the granularity. They'll be able to say, okay, R is this value in London, it's this in Liverpool, it's this in Glasgow. And they'll be able to do more of a zoning, which is what's happening in France, where Paris isn't unlocking as much as Carcassonne, say. I know about Carcassonne because I've got a little place there. So they're a green zone. So they are actually opening up all their bars and restaurants on the 2nd of June, which is going to make people in the UK feel even more frustrated, of course, because we won't be anywhere near doing that by 2nd of June.
Oh, imagine sneaking out for a lovely glass of wine, Doctor. Just maybe just 2 of us, some olives, and watching the world go by.
Staring into each other's eyes.
Anyway.
But
to your bloodshot
anyway,
eyes.
Going back to this frustration and boredom, I was talking to actually a friend of mine in Carcassonne who was saying that she'd had a chat with a common friend who I suppose you'd say was always a bit of an alpha male. He'd probably deny it. And they're sure that they heard him say he was furloughed. And then a week later, they brought it up again and he completely denied it, almost sort of aggressively. And she got the sense that there might be a lot of stigma attached to the large proportion of people who have been furloughed in the UK and around the rest of the world. And it set me thinking about the mental health consequences of being furloughed. I thought, who's an expert on this? And I thought of Tim Payne, who is working in people consulting practice at KPMG, although he's sought for his own. And
well, he's more than just working. He's a partner there, in fact. So perfect candidate to talk about.
Yeah. So sorry, Tim, I didn't want to undermine your seniority, but first of all, thanks for coming on.
No, it's my pleasure. It's really good to talk to you guys.
So I just thought we could start by asking you really what you see going on at the moment in the marketplace with regard to furloughing and how you've been involved in that.
One, I guess, quick caveat, which is most of the clients I tend to work with are, they're at the upper end of the scale. So they're, big companies. And they tend to be more sort of traditional office-based organisations, but with a bit of retail, but they're often in the financial services sector. So, talking about big banks, insurance companies, those kind of things. So, the populations that we're dealing with, the employees there, they're people that tend to either go into a branch or into an office, maybe a contact centre, a call centre. They're not manufacturing,
No,
that kind of stuff. And we've definitely seen, as I'm sure you would imagine, a number of different phases of how big organisations have responded during the crisis. So they look at their staff, and the early phase was really all about trying to find a way to keep going whilst allowing the staff employees to work remotely. And I found it'd be interesting if you guys have sort of experienced this with the other people you've been talking to over the 9 weeks, but a genuine and real concern for employees and putting employee well-being and health at the very top of the agenda. And all of the clients I've spoken to really started from that premise, which is this is, our number one objective here is to make sure our staff are looked after.
Right, that's really good to hear, because I don't think that's happening everywhere.
Well, I just coming in on that. I work in a similar environment to Tim, and I have to say that my company has done pretty well. And you saying those things, Tim, really echoes my experience in that we have 2 weekly comms with the CEO. My company's about 1,200 people worldwide. 1 weekly comms with the managing partner within the UK. And then we have 3 weekly sessions, which are more casual things where anyone can join the call, and we just ask how we are. We play games sometimes, and we send photographs of our kids. We have our kids on camera, and it's a far more social thing. And I was volunteered by the managing partner to chair those, and I do that 3 times a week, and I enjoy it. And that connection with my colleagues is surprisingly important and surprisingly nurturing, and I'm getting feedback that they feel the same way. So from my perspective as a punter, as it were, I've had pretty good experiences in terms of how management have stepped up.
I feel I need to steer it back though to the main subject, because actually, you're still working, and so the colleagues that you join in these team building exercises online.
I am, and I wonder if I wonder to myself how I would feel psychologically as a guy who's been in solid work for 32 years, how I'd feel if the company said, actually, we can do without you for the next few weeks. And I don't think it would have a good effect on my psyche, to be honest.
Yeah, that's it. Also, I think that, Oliver, your level of seniority means that you're unlikely to be furloughed. But I wondered if you were aware of any systematic attempts to contact people low down the organisation who may have been furloughed.
Yes, the answer to that is yes. People who have been furloughed have been looked after. But to be honest, I don't know whether they continue to be looked after. And I suspect they're not. I think the emphasis is on the people who are still working to make sure that they're informed, firstly, and what Tim said about making sure that the health of the people, and the CEO, the big cheese from Spain, will say, okay, 3 things on the agenda for this call. 1, our people. 2, our firm. 3, our clients, in that order. Yeah. It's a really positive message, I think.
That's fine, but they may be falling down because the people that are most vulnerable psychologically at this stage are the people who are furloughed. Tim, have you got any
Yeah, true.
experience of that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly a lot of the clients I speak to have avoided having to furlough people, but some have furloughed, and you'll know the stats better than me, Paul. But there's significant numbers of the working population are either now unemployed, working for the government, or being paid through furlough. It's quite big numbers. I think, I mean, my experience is that the bigger organisations who have furloughed staff are still they're still staff. They're still employees. They're just not
That's
actually
good.
working
Yeah.
at the moment, and that's really important. So they're not been made redundant. They are still being paid, which is I think we'll talk later about the difference between furlough and redundancy, but clearly that's a significant difference.
Significant difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're not suffering the financial worries that someone who's unemployed would have. Yeah.
Or I mean, they're not getting
Not to the same
full
degree.
pay, so but not to the same degree.
They're mostly getting 80%, aren't they? I think of their pay.
Yes, that's the rule. But it's up to a cap. So it depends what your salary is. You may not be getting that much. You may not be getting the full 80%.
Ah, of course. Right. So you could actually have a drastic reduction in your pay.
You could indeed. But companies are trying really hard to stay in touch with those populations just as much as the people at work. I would say.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But of course it's a different experience. And coming back to your friend who you talked about in the intro, I think one of your questions is why is it such a difficult experience, and why might some people find it more difficult? I mean, I think part of the answer is the degree to which an individual has built their identity around work, which you'll find in many professions and other sort of classic white collar roles. So if your whole kind of a large part of your life has been wrapped up in being the best you can be at work and really getting a lot of your psychological needs met through the workplace, it's going to hit you harder, clearly.
This needs for affiliation, respect, self-esteem, those sorts of esteem needs, I guess.
Yeah.
They're all really critical, aren't they? They're more critical for some people than others. Yeah.
I think that's right. And but I think they also have an impact on everyone, so to some extent. And they kind of reference, there's lots of models out there. The reference model I often come back to is the SCARF model, where you look at.
Is that an acronym?
It's a good acronym. It's a good one. Easy to remember.
We love an acronym on this show. So SCARF, did you say?
SCARF, yes. So the things that when you lose them in a work context, you feel really.
Your neck feels cold.
Yeah, exactly.
Psychologically speaking.
Was this a play on the scarf word there, Doctor?
Yeah, it was.
It's very
Psychologically, you've
Excellent.
got a bare neck.
You've got a bare neck, exactly. I don't think that's part of the model, but
Okay.
but what do you lose? What's in the model? So status.
S for status. Got
Yeah.
that. Right.
So coming into something like furlough, if your identity is really wrapped up in your work, you're going to potentially feel like your status is lowered in society amongst your colleagues, your friends. Starts to get you. The C is really around sort of consistency. So, most of us, not all, but most of us like some predictability in our lives. Kind of like to know what's coming.
Some certainty about the future and some routine.
Exactly. And furlough sort of takes that predictability away, because you don't know how long it's going to last for, you're not allowed to do other stuff. So
and I venture to say it's uncertainty about the future, because you don't know. You've got financial worries.
Yeah.
But also you don't know about the long-term stability of your employer. So that's going to be nagging at you, isn't it?
I totally agree. And I think, underlying all of this is, the real spectre of financial uncertainty. Because I think, you only need to be reading the press and you can kind of be starting to feel quite anxious about the future of your organisation, and so on. So,
Yeah.
so that's a real thing. I think that the A is kind of autonomy, which Paul, as a psychiatrist, we do need a sense of mastery, and that we can kind of be in charge of our own destiny in some way. And I think furloughing really does take that out of your hands, actually, in a way that redundancy doesn't, because if you make redundancy redundant, then you can start to look for new things. But furlough, you're sort of basically sitting on your hands.
You're in limbo, aren't you?
You
Is
are.
what we were saying. What's come up time and time again has been quite toxic for your mental state is feeling out of control. It's a control issue, and where is your locus of control? It's no longer internal. It's more, if you're working for a company, you got this. It may be an illusion, but you've got this impression that the harder you work or the more effectively you work, the better you'll do, and you're in charge of that. When you're furloughed, the locus of control is external.
That's
Your
right.
fate is completely determined by the
Others.
boardroom.
It's funny. The one thing that came across there, Tim, when you were talking about it, well, both of you, is in a sense, furlough is worse than redundancy. In that furlough, you're suspended animation, as it were, and you've lost, like you say, all sense of autonomy and potentially consistency.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't think it is.
Please
I don't think
continue.
it is worse, because I think it's you are getting paid, ultimately. But I think psychologically,
yeah, good point.
You could make a case for it being a bit more damaging, if you like.
Yeah, exactly.
So the other bits of the old SCARF model, so the R is relationships. So, I'm sure you've talked before about the importance of social support on mental well-being.
Yeah.
And, not
It's
everybody,
a buffer
but
against stress, isn't it? Having social support, and that extends to your work colleagues.
Yeah, and for some people, they get the majority of their social support from work colleagues. Not everyone, of course, but many people do, and just the lack of that, I think, is potentially quite damaging.
It's just nice to be asked, how your wife and kids, how's things at home. And I guess some companies are better than others at offering that kind of pastoral support and mentorship. And that's gone.
I mean,
to an extent,
most of the time you sort of work. You sort of work as a lone wolf, don't you, Paul? And there's the patient doctor relationship is the strongest one in your game, and that obviously has to be very professional. You and me, Tim, we work in more sort of communities of people, and you do get quite a bond with them. But I suspect, Paul, you do as well with other clinicians, I guess.
Absolutely. Don't think there aren't meetings and boardrooms involved in my job. There's all that stuff going on, managerial stuff, key performance indicators, all that sort of thing to be part of as well. And some consultants thrive off that. Others just want to be treating patients. But I think it's nice to have that. Actually, it gives you a good balance. And yeah, sure. Every morning we have a clinical meeting with the multidisciplinary team. So it is a community.
Good. I'm relieved.
And also you do have chats to your consultant colleagues, and every month you have a big consultant meeting. So yeah, there is that element to it that I would miss if I was entirely working from home. But so certainly Tim has really got onto something there in terms of what most of us get from our work to varying degrees is social and emotional support. And the evidence shows, as Tim said, that the more social support we have, the better we are buffered against stress, the more we can cope. We're more resilient. So you've got, one more letter left in the acronym.
What's the F? I'm hanging on here, man.
The F is the perceived fairness of the process. So if you feel that perhaps you've been, in this case, furloughed unfairly, or some of your colleagues haven't and you have, that's really going to sting. So there's the psychologists talk about kind of procedural justice, and that's what this is. And organisations need to be very, very cognizant of not just deciding in a fair way who gets furloughed, but also communicating the reasons and the ways those decisions are made, so that people kind of understand that there's some fairness in there. So that's the last bit.
Yeah, that absolutely ties in with one of the main impacts of furloughing that I read about. There was a report by the City Mental Health Alliance UK, and feeling undervalued and self-worth taking a knock was a big one.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no communication from higher management telling you that this is nothing to do with performance, purely about seniority, your self-esteem is going to take a knock.
Yep.
Anecdotally, a solicitor was furloughed. She's very good, but her reaction was immediately, so why me? And I want a full explanation. And she got all kind of legalistic about it. I want to know exactly why I've been furloughed. And it did just come down to the fact she was the most junior person in the firm. But that was a failure of communication, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's really important. I think the other thing we haven't talked about too much, but there's obviously a wide range of different circumstances out there. And actually, Oliver, for you and probably for me, this period hasn't been too disruptive. I imagine we're still doing the same work that we did. We're just not actually having to get on the tube. But what we've seen employees really focus on, and I think come to realise is the difference. So it's fine for me, but what about employees who are in a abusive relationship or just an unhappy relationship? What about dual working couples with 3 kids under the age of 6, with no access to child support? There are very different experiences depending on your circumstances, which I think are going to drive very different mental health outcomes, even if you're still working, regardless of whether you've been furloughed or not.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tim. In terms of, in a sense, we're less affected, and we must put ourselves in the shoes of people who are more affected. I was wondering, it might be an illogical question, but as I get older, I start to value other things more, like family and friends, frankly, and doing things like this. To be honest, just doing something just for the sake of doing it, rather than work and progressing up the career ladder. And I'm wondering, whether I feel a little bit less vulnerable to the psychological issues of the company rejecting me than someone maybe who's earlier on in their career still has that hunger, and as you said before, is more defined by their career. So I wonder if I'm kidding myself, or whether someone of a certain age, I'm in my mid-50s now, is somewhat protected from the vagaries of furlough, simply because it matters less to them.
Yeah, I suppose you're more financially comfortable as well, though, aren't you?
I'm further down the line, therefore I have less mortgage. That's right.
Yeah.
My kids are growing up.
And if the worst came to the worst, you could sell an asset, couldn't you, and kind of be okay?
I've done the planning because I'm an anxious person, as is well documented. So I've done the financial planning, and I know you're worried about me, Dr. Paul, but I'll be absolutely fine.
No, I'm not. Yeah, no, I'm not worried. Yeah, I'm more worried when you try and go for a run or cycle. You might just keel over.
There's absolutely no planning there. I will definitely die.
Just a comment on your morbid obesity. That's all. But I guess it's not very relevant.
Very valid, useful. Well, it's always good to be reminded. I've just come off a Zoom call with all my siblings, and they help me remember. Bloody fit as fiddles. They're like whippets up north.
Actually, yeah, your older brother is skinny as a rake, isn't he? He's lean.
He's 60 years old today, my lovely brother, and he is, he can run a marathon in 3 hours. Ridiculous.
At 60, that is incredible.
That's amazing.
3 hours 20.
Well, that's encouraging for us all, actually.
Yeah.
So, I think it's difficult for us to put ourselves in the shoes of someone who's in a different position to us. I was thinking about age, actually. There might be probably your 30s is your most vulnerable, and your early 40s maybe. Because when you're in your 20s, you're sort of thinking, oh, great, I get to just hang out and be paid for it. I can imagine thinking that when I was a 28-year-old me.
Me too.
But I can imagine a 38-year-old me on the way up career-wise might be a little bit more knocked sideways.
Remember that period?
Actually, thinking about it incrementally, it was pretty similar to my 28-year-old self. No, but just being knocked sideways a little bit, I think. And I would definitely think I would need those check-ins from my employer, just keeping me in the loop, the same as everybody else, not treating me differently to the people who are still working. I think that's probably key. So you don't feel
What do you think,
abandoned.
Tim? Are we putting too much emphasis on that?
On age,
What do
no,
you
I think, well, I think it's not just pure age. I think, as Paul was saying, it's a kind of combination of factors of career stage, financial
Yeah.
security,
How much you like your job.
how much you like the job, all of those kind of things. But I think it does correlate very highly with age. So I agree, actually.
Oh, right.
I think,
I'm surprised.
yeah, no, I think the other population that we need to be worrying about, other than I think, Paul, you're right. You're kind of, mid-career, the mid-career people who are, potential, that if they did get made redundant, and we're about to enter, one of the worst recessions, for a long time, then, that group is particularly vulnerable because, that it will be hard to get another job. And I'm sure that's preying on people's minds. So that is a critical group. I think the other really critical group is at the other end of the scale, the very young, just coming out of university or college or school, trying to get
Right.
into the labour market, or just having started. Because I think, certainly many of the organisations I see out there, they're pausing their sort of early talent hiring processes. So whether graduate recruitment or, school leaver programs. And I think we're going to end up, it's more of a sort of general societal comment, I guess, but I think we're going to end up with quite large numbers of people at that stage who aren't getting on the career ladder in the way they would have hoped. And they're such critical early years, because if you miss out on those, it's very difficult then to get back on. So I think,
Right.
I suspect, I don't know if you've come across any research on that, Paul.
In those particularly competitive professions, I should imagine.
Yeah,
Those first few years are critical.
I mean,
people do reinvent themselves, do retrain, and do fine. But I guess they're the ones we really got to keep an eye on. The people are just coming onto the labour market now and are struggling.
Yeah.
I mean, could it be that this is sort of a mini generation of people, though, and they're all suffering from the same thing, and it works itself out in the end? Or indeed, do millennials, and I suppose there's going to be something called post millennials soon, do they sometimes, I believe that they see this is part of the normal working patterns these days? You don't have a job for life. You have a portfolio career. You make different choices and go in different directions. It could be, I ask, that they might be more resilient than we give them credit for, and actually this will just be yet another variable they have to take into account in the slightly more dynamic job market than we were used to when we came out of uni. I don't know.
I think there is. So the next generation, people are starting to call Generation Z, obviously, and there isn't that much research on them, but there is a bit. There was a good Ipsos paper last year which started to look at some of the attitudes for that generation. I think one of the most the biggest difference between them and the millennials was the sense of kind of much more fluid identity that they have. So both from a kind of almost like from everything from gender fluidity through to personal identity. So that would support your theory, Ollie, that perhaps they are more resilient in this situation and are prepared to reinvent themselves, and aren't necessarily expecting the career steps that even the millennials have gone through.
I was wondering if it
relates.
I wonder if there's another aspect as well, which might mean that there's a better prognosis than we think, which is that since 2008 there has been a pattern for people to have lots of what they call side hustles. So they're working for the man, but they've also got this kind of startup, or they might have their fingers in 4 different startups.
Podcast
like this one, which is obviously going to make us stratospherically rich. But this.
I'll give you the revenue figures again. It's let's have a look. April. Yes, it's
still 0 pence. Yeah, 0 pence. Yeah, £0 and 0 pence.
You need to hire a consultant, guys.
No, we're doing it for the love. But does that make sense, Tim? I mean, I get this impression, but maybe I'm just hanging around with too many London hipsters.
No,
or people who know London hipsters.
It's really funny. We were talking to a client bank, investment bank, who were identifying kind of almost like a new risk category, which was people coming through younger generation coming through, but actually having other things going on the side, which actually you're not allowed to do under most employment, contracts. And the risk is that, either reputational, that you start to bring the employer into disrepute, or you just, I don't know. But so it's starting to happen, exactly as you just said. Interesting.
And I think it is a symptom of the crash in the credit crunch in 2008, where people did have to, I remember, and the enterprise investment scheme, it really injected a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in our Generation Z, I think, and they were very keen to start up all these companies, many of which presumably folded. That's a natural selection of business. But I think it's led to a different mindset, perhaps, which may or may not stand them in good stead going forward. I can imagine the more resourceful of them really using this time to plan their futures and really research and maybe network as well, so that they can come out of this stronger.
I'm so impressed by the people who come out of university and are attracted to firms like the one I work for. Very high quality people, very self-starting, very sort of imaginative about how their career is not necessarily vertical but lateral.
I think there's a, what did you do during the lockdown is going to be a question at, job interviews to come.
Interesting, yes, inevitable, yes.
What constructive things did you do, or did you
Nice.
just play on your computer game for the 9 weeks? It's
So, gosh, yeah, because they want people who are self-motivated and driven.
Killer question.
It's a killer question, yeah.
What sometimes we ask is, what's your quirk? Which puts off the people who don't think laterally and are a little bit cookie cutter. And you say, I sometimes say, if someone's presenting really strongly, what's your quirk? What's the thing that makes you a little bit different? And it's a really interesting question. Puts off a lot of people, but a lot of people you get to learn. You get to learn about them. Quirk might be a bit of a dangerous word to use sometimes, but generally speaking, you get the reaction. I was wanting to ask Tim. We haven't really talked about things that can be done, and of course, you can't talk about your clients or even your own firm, but what can be done to minimize the impact of the most vulnerable, those people who are really suffering from a crash in their self-esteem, perhaps due to one or more of the SCARF criteria? What are the things that you can advise, or firms can do, small firms or individuals can do, to minimize the impact?
I think it's a combination of two things. One is the topic we've already touched on, and you illustrated really nicely, Ol, which is the quality of management and leadership and communication that's happening. You can't get past that. You have to be able to your management population has to be able to engage with people not face to face, through electronic media, in a way where people really understand and believe that there is empathy, that there is care, that there is interest and curiosity in their situation. And not all managers are great at that on the best of days, face to face. So it is a challenge, and I think we're starting to see a different kind of, if you do your you do your talent review of management skills next year, you might have a slightly different set of criteria. But so I think that's one thing, absolutely continuing to communicate, but communicate in a very empathic way. And the other thing, on the other end of the scale, is if you're working from home, how flexible are you allowing them to be? Is it okay that they work half days because they have childcare responsibility, and are you still going to pay them? Those kind of things. Is it all right to take some time off and then log on later on in the day? So I think the best companies I've seen who are responding are being both very supportive in their communication, but also very supportive in their allowance of flexibility in working practices, so people can kind of adapt.
Yeah, and of course a lot of people are not going to change their remote working when the lockdown is lifted. That a lot of companies must be realizing now that they must be thinking to themselves, why am I paying such high rent and such high heating and electricity costs for this big office block
Yeah.
when I'm actually finding that people are possibly even more efficient working from home.
Yeah, that's exactly what. So I said at the beginning, there have been different phases of a reaction. The phase that most big companies are in at the moment is return planning, and exactly as you said, Ollie, earlier, it's actually they're finding it was much easier to get into lockdown than it is to get out of it. It's more complicated to go, but also there is a real sense of rethinking work, and the office in particular. Those traditional big organisations are in no rush to get back to everyone being back in the office, and I don't think that. I think that many will never go back to what the ways they used to work. There'll still be offices, but we won't be going in every day like we used to, and the space will be used for different purposes. It will be used for collaboration, or it will be used for creativity, innovation, and we will all be working much more remotely, much more of the time. I have absolutely no doubt about that, and one of the drivers is economics, as you said, Paul. Why spend so much money on the big office spaces? One of the drivers is productivity. And we've actually found clients saying that their productivity has stayed the same or increased even during the lockdown period.
Yeah.
Partly it'll be environmental, which everyone's sort of forgotten a bit about. But just before coronavirus, there was a massive focus on our environment. The Bank of England was really, really pushing it, and will continue to push it. And that on its own would have started to drive some of these trends, just not quite so quickly. So that's another factor that's going to.
It makes you wonder about big infrastructure projects like HS2 and how they're going to, people's attitudes towards that are going to change.
Yeah,
is it crucial to take the HS2 to have a meeting in Manchester, travel from London to Manchester, or vice versa?
Yeah.
I've become a massive fan of remote working. I mean, I always quite liked it, but the lockdown has cemented it for me. We've done, again, similar work to Tim. We do workshops, tend to be more technical on my side. And I'm thinking there's no way you can run a workshop remotely. It just doesn't work. You've got to feel the room. You've got to see who's bored. You've got to, I run workshops generally rather than contribute to them because I have no expertise whatsoever. But you've got to see how the dynamic in the room is working. But it's not true. You can do it. The software's there. You can have these whiteboards that you must use, Tim, I'm sure, where you can all contribute at the same time. You can prioritize things. You can have arguments, and it kind of works. But I'm interested to go back to what you say about the importance of management, empathetic, emotionally intelligent management, and whether that can be. And we've actually talked about this before the podcast, Tim, haven't we? The three of us, as to whether you get 100% of the understanding of the communication from a remote, even video call, or whether there is something, and I suppose inevitably something, but whether there's a significant amount of information lost by having a remote conversation, as there is in having it face to face. And I think you and I differed slightly in that I got the impression that I thought the loss can be minimal as long as you have had some kind of physical interaction with that person in the past. But I think you were you suggesting before that quite a lot is lost in a video conference over a physical encounter.
I think more than and Paul remember these stats from student days, but something like 80% of communication message is more non-verbal than verbal, and if you're working through Teams or Zoom, whatever, the visual is degraded. It's just not as good as real life. So there is a small delay on both those systems that you don't really notice, but it's there, and so it can kind of drive a sort of slight sense of anxiety that you've been heard, even though you're not quite aware of it.
You're not quite sure actually when you've been heard. That is a big problem with Zoom. I think, and it gets worse than the greater number of people are on the call or in the workshop or in the meeting.
Oh yeah.
And also you're missing up. I don't know if you can really sense. It's this thing of sensing when you can interrupt. It's probably more acute in the real setting than when you're just looking at a lot of faces on a screen.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Although maybe we're just unskilled in that environment, and it'll improve.
Yeah, we're quite adept to changing to new protocols.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And one thing, we did have a doctor on in the last episode, and she said it's because you said a lot of it is lost on the visual link, and I think that's right due to the often poor resolution. And she was saying that in her consultations, remote consultations with patients, the quality of the visual contact is key. Having a good computer screen with good resolution.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and maybe, but I think you're right. I think we'll adapt, and I think you add in 5G when that comes through, quality is going to get better. I don't think,
and maybe the functionality as well, break off meetings and all that sort of thing would be easier.
Oh, you can do that?
I know you can, but I'm not sure how great the functionality. I'm not sure how reliable that is yet.
Worked for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty good, or it can be. Yeah, I know you're suffering under a particular provider in London with your
that's true
at the moment as well, which is key. It's an interesting one. I think people will develop different ways of communicating as well to take into account the remote nature. But I think you're right, Tim and Paul. I mean, you're both psychologists and psychiatrists between you, and there's can be no doubt that the experts like you are saying things are lost.
I think one thing that will be lost and that people will miss definitely is the kind of and I said it before, the kind of before you sit down to have the meeting, there's a kind of how are you? Hi, there's an interaction that goes on, and there's the sort of break for coffee and the informal chats that happen then. All that's lost with these Zoom meetings.
That's right. You talked about
it's all lost.
Well, you've got this other book. Your other book is about environment and how that affects mental health. And you're right. The actual physical act of getting your papers up, getting your laptop up or whatever, walking to another room gives you a sort of chance to reset. But Tim, I know you were saying this, and particularly in your job and being a partner at KPMG, you were just Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom with no chance to reset, recontextualize. And you're saying that was pretty exhausting.
Yeah, I think I've noticed that with a lot of clients that there is we're probably still learning how to make the best of this. But at the moment, that you hear a lot of people saying, "Oh my God, my Zoom started or my team started at 8:30, and I had no breaks and people just scheduling them because you don't have to walk somewhere, but actually that gap that you used to have is where you would process what happened in the meeting, kind of just work out what you're going to do next.
Yeah, it's a mental space.
Yeah, and that lack is a real. I think people get to the end of their working days at the moment, people who are lucky enough to still be working, but they are very drained. And I think couple that your environmental point, Paul. You're also not moving. Maybe you move from room in your house to somewhere else, but you don't get the train journey to unwind. So actually it's quite cumulative, and I think that's one of the reasons why people who are working at the moment are starting to feel really tired by lockdown.
I think that's right. I think we're going to see more burnout, and then there will have to be a rethink yet again, and employers will have to consider. Well, we'll have to consider building in this reflection time and making sure people are having breaks. I think there's a lot of workplace legislation. You know more about this than me, Tim, that would say you'd need to have a certain number of breaks in the day. Well, certainly you need a lunch break. I know Tennant, who works high up in strategy and advertising, and she is doing exactly what you said, which is going straight from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, and she doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And I think she's going to burn out if she continues to do that every day, day in, day out.
Yeah.
Week in, week out.
I think that's right. And I think the more savvy people are starting to, so I know friends and colleagues who have started to put in, Zoom meetings where actually they haven't got any Zoom meetings, so they are forcing themselves to have a couple of breaks through the day. And maybe like you said, we're going to learn how to get better at all of this stuff. And, different cultural norms are going to emerge and different etiquettes. And, I think it's going to, we'll get better at it.
I wondered if we were going to end up with, instead of offices, flexible meeting spaces where everyone in a team can meet face to face once a week, or twice a week, or 3 times a week. Can you imagine that? And then you end up with a social afterwards. Maybe everyone goes down the pub once we're unlocked again, or any other culturally appropriate place. But So yeah, I can see that. I can see actually sort of, the coffee works and all those chains where you are effectively hot desking in a cafe. I could see companies doing something along those lines. Does that make sense?
I think that's right. I think I'll let Tim answer this, but as well, obviously. But I think the actual space is becoming less important. You used to have an office, and it was the company's office, and those logos,
and that'll have a lot of esteem attached to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah. I don't know what you think, Tim, because you come from a very traditional company, which had all that stuff.
Yeah. Although even before the virus, we were starting to move towards more collaboration and less kind of normal space. I think the thing that we need to just be a bit careful about. I don't know if you remember the example when for Yahoo, when Marissa Mayer took over as CEO, there was a lot of publicity about it at the time because they had a very, very work from home culture. In fact, there were a lot of people who were there who had never been into head office ever, and her feeling when she took over was that there was a real lack of culture and lack of shared understanding of and bonds between people who are working there. And she took a really bold decision, and she kind of said, right, we're actually going to all come into the office, which was really unpopular and got a bit of a backlash. But I totally kind of see her point, and I think we're kind of okay at the moment through COVID because mostly we're talking to people we already know. But as the longer it goes on, there'll be new hires, new employees who you won't have had time to build that bond up with. So I do think there's going to be a need for some kind of your space in your organization, which is branded and represents the kind of culture that you want in your organization, and probably is more collaborative in nature. But I agree, I think we'll be going into it less. We'll be going into it for specific reasons. Maybe it's for bonding, maybe it's for big set piece communications, and maybe it's for collaborating with customers or clients or third parties or whatever. But yeah, it'll change.
I think we'll end up with a combination of both, won't we? Ultimately.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't know what that will look like yet. Yeah. Fascinating.
I love all this new flexibility. You can teach old dog new tricks. I can sometimes have a great day where I literally get up late. On a weekday, I can get up at 8:30, even 9, be at my desk at 9:30, mess around and get bored, so do nothing. Then take my daughter maybe to see her pony, which is compliant with the regulations because he's livestock, the little bastard. Then come back and have some intense calls, and then sort of slide into the evening with my laptop on my lap, really getting into some piece of work. And at the end of it, I think if I add that all up, I've probably done 9-10 hours of work. I'm pretty chilled. I've seen the horse, and I had a lie-in. I'm embracing it myself. And
so everyone should just relax because Ollie's fine. It's the Oliver Turnbull is fine podcast.
Yeah, it is. I'm fine. Yeah. I'm sorry to hear your story. Goodbye.
I presume the livestock's fine too.
Yeah.
Livestock, hasn't had the virus and was jumping quite nicely today.
The horses don't succumb to the virus.
Not this one. They succumb to loads of other things, the bloody money-sucking bastards.
Yeah, right.
They can twist their gut. These animals, how did they manage to evolve, right, in a situation where they can legitimately, spontaneously twist their gut dead?
Wow.
What kind of animal is that?
You would have thought that propensity would have been bred out long ago, wouldn't you?
She bloody well would. That's 500 times a shot. 500 pounds a shot.
Spoken like a true Yorkshireman.
Yes, you're illustrating the trap we talked about earlier, which was there are people in very different circumstances than us, right? So, and obviously Ollie, our environments are particular because they're kind of big companies. But I think there's and this is an area I'm not so familiar with because it's not really my sector. But there's another mental health angle here, I think, which is for people who are working with public. Retail, public transport, anyone that has to, by definition, come into contact with lots of other people. That so some people may be quite worried about that right now, as we go through the various government suggestions on easing, there's a big question out there for many employees, I think, which is, can we and should we push our employees to come back, even if they are uncomfortable about doing it? And where do you draw the line? And how do you make that decision? That's quite a big one.
And that's where unions come in, isn't it? To make sure that employers have done a proper risk assessment. Or it may be the case that the employer is so risk averse that they keep they make everyone redundant or keep people on furlough. But I guess there are certain essential jobs like working on the buses or the London Underground that have to be kept going for key workers. And I can imagine feeling very anxious about that as an employee. Yeah. And people on construction sites have been well publicised, I suppose, concerns about that, where it's very difficult to maintain the social distancing.
Yeah.
The other thing that occurred to me was people going to public-facing jobs because they like to be facing the public. They're like people.
Yeah.
So there's the flip side of it, which is those that are furloughed are missing that contact.
Oh, that's a nice point, actually.
And thinking that they may not get back to that job ever. So I guess those people need extra support. And I guess their employer should be helping them to sort of think about volunteering opportunities to keep body and mind together.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I have seen a lot of evidence of that, actually. Organisations really making available more kind of online learning, but on lots of different topics. So, not necessarily just related to your day-to-day work, but, more broadly, encouraging volunteering for people who are either furloughed or even at work still. We certainly do that.
It's a great solution to social isolation at the very least, isn't it? The volunteering, but also makes you feel a little bit less useless if you're someone who's really struggles with that lack of structure and lack of purpose.
It gives you more of a sense of control back. Your point on, you're actually doing something which is under your control.
Very nice point, yeah. But also buddy systems. So buddying someone up with someone else who maybe one of the buddies is. Maybe both buddies are on furlough, maybe one's working and the other one's on furlough, but having someone who checks in on you regularly, as well as your boss. And the other one was keeping everyone in the loop, not just the people who are still working, but the people who are furloughed, so they don't feel abandoned and forgotten by their bosses, by their employers. And I could see that being relevant wherever you are in the food chain, whatever the size of company.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can flip the scarf model around the other way and say, well, what can we be doing for anyone who's on furlough to kind of make these factors better? So, just talked about the relationship one. How can we make sure that people are buddying is a great example. I think it works really well. Continuity. How do you make sure, even if you've got nothing new to say as an organisation about what might happen next, you've got to keep saying it, because people want to know what's coming next. So, that's really important. How might you help people to feel a certain sense of status if they're on furlough? You have to be a bit careful because, I think part of the rules of furlough is, you can't work. But, within that boundary, what else could you do? And I think your, volunteering would help there again. So I think, that,
and maybe thinking about helping people to think about where they want their career to go, so that they're a bit more future oriented.
Yeah. And they can use some of that time to, at least do some personal development towards that goal. Yeah.
Personal development and career focused development as well. Mm-hmm. Both could be done during that furlough time, couldn't they?
Yeah.
Both are equally important.
Cool. Brilliant. We covered a lot of ground, I think, actually. Thanks, Tim, for joining us. I think what I'm taking away is empathy, really. And I love the scarf model. I have come across it, actually, but I've never had it explained so eloquently. Status, consistency, autonomy, relationships, and fairness. Tim Payne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tim. And where can we see you playing the blues next? Maybe you've got a gig booked in for October.
I think you might have to tune into Spotify. Blue Dogs. There you go.
Blue Dogs.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm a follower, and we'll put any gigs you have. Let us know, and we'll put it on our Facebook page, which is followed by 1,600 people. So that's not too bad. That's it for now. We have another special guest next week, but you can find us at the usual places, can't you, Paul?
Yeah, usual places. Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, our website. Our handle is YTLF, WHYTLF. Let us know your experiences of furlough if you are on furlough.
And we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah. Thanks a lot again, Tim. And bye for now.
Cheers, guys. Bye.